All right, fantastic, fantastic. Hey, folks, my name is Tim Black. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Tim Black Show. Hey, man, I've had this person on the show so many times, man. This is just a friend of mine who's doing some really cool, dope stuff, and I want to bring him back. His name is SHAHID Buttar. He's out of San Francisco. He's an activist. He's a constitutional lawyer. Someone today said this to me, and I BS you not, SHAHID. She said, you know what? I like SHAHID. He's really cool for a lawyer.
I resemble that remark.
Yeah, yeah. So I just thought I'd pass that on, man. She also said, hey, man, he's also a great rapper. So, like, if you could get him to rap, that'd be dope. I don't know if this is the forum for it, but I'm going to leave the door open.
Nice. I might bust a little chant for you. I allow my MC sensibility to inform some of our chants in the street, and I do think that it is one of the campaign superpowers, to be able to present. In fact, just last night I was in a meeting seeking an endorsement from a local club, and one of the allies in the room asked me, she said, you have a very thought-heavy campaign. She's like, you're stealing a lot of ideas. It's really complicated. How do you make this accessible for people? And I just looked at her and I said, you need to see a doctor. It should be free. Healthcare is a right, not a commodity.
You need to see a doctor. It should be free. Healthcare is a right, not a commodity. You need to see a nurse. It should be free. Healthcare is a right, not a commodity.
And we spend a lot of time like in the street chanting that, with banners, doing the whole public visibility thing, distilling the movement messages into these discrete chunks. I appreciate that. It's funny you should share that with me, and I appreciate the sentiment. It was maybe like 3 or 4 hours ago. I was on a show. Do you know Pasta with the Convo Couch?
Yes, I do.
So we were talking, and he says to me, we met at the California State Democratic Party convention maybe a week ago, and he opens his show talking about seeing me on the dance floor because I can cut a rug, right? I'm an artist, right? So he's like, you might be the flyest congressional candidate. I mean, it cracked me up. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Yeah, you got bars, man. And you got policies. It's crazy, man. But for anybody who's not up to speed on you yet, SHAHID, tell them what you're doing, man. For some reason, this guy keeps wanting to run for office. SHAHID, what's going on, man? What are you running for this time?
So same seat. I've only run for office once before. This is my second run for office ever, and I'm challenging the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, for the U.S. House seat representing the 12th Congressional District of California. This is San Francisco and just the most progressive parts of the city. And we are represented by a relative centrist. In the last cycle, we ran for 3 months. At the end of the cycle, I got more votes in the primary against Pelosi coming from the left than anyone in a decade. I beat half a dozen progressive campaigns that have been in the race for long before me. So having established myself as the leading progressive challenger to Nancy Pelosi in 2018, I'm looking very forward to liberating the seat in 2020. And some of the issues that we're running on include establishing healthcare as a human right, and securing robust solutions to the climate crisis that also address the economic crisis besetting the country, ensuring a just transition to workers displaced in the migration to a sustainable green economy, impeaching our criminal president. Would love to talk about that. We've got a whole bunch of highlights related to that we could talk about, and ending both mass incarceration and mass surveillance. I think these are a bunch of issues that demonstrate Pelosi's vulnerability on both the left and the right, and looking forward to making that case over the next year.
Wow, man. I love the fact that you're getting started so early, my brother. Really gives us an opportunity to really get behind you. Wow, man, I didn't know that you did so well in the last showing. I mean, I just love your message. I love your policy. And I think that you definitely are someone who brings a lot to the table, man, with your grassroots bona fides. And all that's fantastic. But like I said, I didn't know that you said you kind of dusted a lot of people in the, other people on the left. What do you think made you so successful last time out?
I appreciate both the reflection, Tim, and the question. I think I was just very different from the other candidates in the sense that I've been fighting for the movement for 20 years. And, I think there are candidates who might be entering politics for the first time without necessarily having established a background, but I've been a policy advocate. I've been a grassroots organizer. I've been inside the institutions. I've been outside the institutions. I've led nonprofits. I've filed impact litigation lawsuits. I've won federal appeals. I've been arrested in the Senate asking questions of executive officials, and I've, done direct action, like sort of having embraced the litany of methodological tactics across a whole suite, and I would even say an array of issues, from marriage equality, long before it was popular among Democrats, campaign finance reform, peace and justice in the face of our wars for profit abroad, climate justice, racial justice, police accountability and particularly accountability for state violence, both in the context of routine state violence, like police violence, and also CIA torture. I've worked on NSA mass surveillance issues, as well as local police surveillance issues. Worked on drone strikes without trial and the threat it presents to the right, drone strikes without trial and the threat it presents, pardon me, to due process. There are others, I could go on, but the depth and breadth of my expertise and work building the movement, I think, distinguishes me from anyone, frankly, who's had a chance to challenge Pelosi. There are others who, for instance, teach law at public universities around the country. It is a travesty in plain sight. And against that, here's coming back to legal realism and the contrast among different rules. There are 2.5 million Americans in prison today for offenses that should not be criminal in the first place in a large number of their instances, while people guilty of our species' most fundamental commitments continue to draw taxpayer-funded paychecks to decide how the law applies to the rest of us. And I would just ask you, as we finish our panel, whether or not the corruption word fits. I'm running out of time, but I want to just note that I do have a range of action opportunities available to each of you, organizationally, individually. If you are at all motivated by this panel.
Right. It's definitely extensive. I mean, I'm thinking, what are some of the things that, so we say, okay, Shahid, what are some things that differentiate you from Pelosi? You're there, you get an opportunity, hopefully you get an opportunity to, to actually debate her, put you guys in the same room, the same place. What would be an issue that you would be chomping at the bit to exploit or to further show why you're the better candidate?
Well, if it was in this cycle, then there are a lot of things we could say about when this hypothetical debate happens. But if it was anytime soon, I would press her to impeach our criminal president. We have a kleptocrat in office who lies through his teeth every time he opens his mouth. He's enriching himself in office, setting aside all the obstruction of justice possibilities, colluding with foreign powers, what have you. I would just rest an impeachment proceeding on his attempt to enrich himself in office. And he does it every day. And frankly, there are no facts that we need to establish the case. The facts are all in the public domain. It doesn't take committee investigations. It just takes political will, which, for better or worse, the Speaker of the House seems to lack. I think there are a lot of things to press around the edges here. Among them are the fact that, and I would say in this forum, if I had the opportunity, that attempting to impeach the president, whether or not the punch can land, is a constitutional imperative to defend the Republic and we the people of the United States, regardless of any political parties' particular calculus about how it will impact their fate in the next elections. First. Second, even if we concede that a political party's machinations or aspirations are relevant here in the calculus about whether or not to initiate impeachment, it is a winning hand for Democrats heading into 2020 because every news cycle after impeachment is initiated will shift in terms of how the president is presented. Democrats fear that it will rile up the right-wing base. They're already riled up. They already say that our kleptocrat is maligned by a liberal media, so there's no reason to unilaterally disarm in the face of that. Moreover, not impeaching is like a wet blanket on the Democratic base, to which Pelosi and other corporate Democrats have been saying for the last 2 years at every opportunity, resist, resist, resist. Where is the resistance now when it matters? We have the House. What does executive accountability look like when you have the House? It looks like filing articles of impeachment. And the presumption that we can't win votes in the Senate, aside from being just profoundly resignatory and weak, frankly, is also demeaning, I think, particularly to Democratic and left-wing activists in purple states who can force the hands of red state senators, which is to say, putting senators in the position where they have to either choose Trump's survival politically or their own. And if there's anything I know about elected Republicans in the Senate is that they look out for themselves first. And that's exactly what we can make happen if the House proceeds. If the House doesn't proceed, none of that can happen. And the game is set at the outset. And the last thing I'll say about this is that if we don't initiate impeachment, at least attempt to drive the process forward, it is an open invitation to any manner of crimes, not only by this president, but everyone in the future. If you think about the congressional prerogatives through the lens of the balance of power between the branches, that's one of the central issues in constitutional law that we explore. We are facing a profound historical loss for the influence of Congress because the lever that it has available to it to check and balance the executive branch is not being pulled. So I would invite the speaker to show up for work in that regard.
Oh, wow, wow. I would love to hear a response to it now. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit and just say,
Please.
you just mentioned that you thought it would be, in spite of the fact that more than likely, it'd be hard to get the Senate to go along with it, almost impossible for the Senate, the Republican Senates, because they know that in those states that aren't so purple, that the Trump base would come after them and they'd be out on their asses. So we know that maybe it'll get through the House, I'm sure. Well, I'm pretty sure. But since we know we won't be able to get the impeachment actually executed because the Senate won't go along with it, you don't believe that that's not handing a victory to Donald Trump in the end?
So first, again, I contest the premise. I think we can flip the Senate, particularly because there will be a lot of heat around this. Secondly, the opportunity to make this case in the Senate before the American people, that will tie up the administration. It will keep it from doing all of the things it is doing right now to undermine environmental protections, to undermine labor rights, to undermine the interests of working families and future generations, just putting the administration on the defensive to force it to grapple with the process. Moreover, think about the Mueller report through the lens of the invitation to impeachment that its author intended it as. Impeachment is not a legal process. It doesn't require an indictable crime. It is a political process that requires Congress to be outraged by the high crimes and misdemeanors of the president. Self-enrichment is a worse crime than any of the ones that presidents have been in office before have committed. The serial lies to other policymakers, to the press, to the public that the president commits on a daily basis, those certainly in total, if not in the discrete instance, should be an impeachable offense. There's so many different discrete grounds for impeachment that simply to start the process, especially if they were discrete proceedings, that the Senate couldn't just dismiss at once, right? Which you can do because there are different charges on which impeachment could be levied. So this could be the congressional agenda for the next year if the House leadership wanted it to be.
The president's behavior in terms of his obstruction of justice, the things that he is doing, it's very clear. It's in plain sight. It cannot be denied. Ignoring subpoenas, obstruction of justice. Yes, these could be impeachable offenses, but I intend not to, the three things. You might understand it better if you remember these three things. We want to follow the facts to get the truth to the American people, with a recognition, too, that no one is above the law, and three, that the president is engaged in a cover-up. And that is what my statement is. How we deal with it is a decision that our caucus makes, and our caucus is very much saying whatever we do, we need to be ready when we do it. And I do think that impeachment is a very divisive place to go in our country. And what we can get the facts to the American people through our investigation, it may take us to a place that is unavoidable in terms of impeachment or not. But we're not at that place.
But Shahid, we just spent 3 years almost talking about Russia. And I think that people have a fatigue with the ongoing process of litigation, the ongoing process of hearings. It's never ending, frankly. I know people who have built YouTube channels up from 0 subscribers to 130,000 subscribers, just covering all of the judicial overseeing the investigations, from Benghazi to the emails to with Donald Trump and Russia. And I think that people just definitely have a fatigue to these types of. I just believe, Shahid, that people, they want Trump out, okay? Especially on the left, especially, I think, Democrats, and by and large, they want Trump out. But I don't think they care much about whether he's impeached. They just want him out. Shouldn't we be better spend our time focused on winning in 2020? When I say we, I mean Democrats. I'm an independent, but more than likely I've never voted for Republicans, so there you have it. But wouldn't we be better spent focused on defeating this guy at the ballot box?
I think they're absolutely inextricably intertwined. First of all, if we don't pursue impeachment, the 2020 election is a referendum on a president who will be leaning into his agenda instead of being held to public account for it. And impeachment proceedings every one of those news cycles covering impeachment would be essentially an earned media hit promoting whoever the alternative to the president is, which won't happen if the process doesn't proceed. Moreover, if the 2020 election happens without impeachment in process, the Democratic base is demobilized. And this is the challenge with corporate Democrats. Their calculus always undervalues the importance of grassroots enthusiasm. This is why Bernie Sanders will likely be the next president of the United States, because what wins elections is the enthusiasm of a base that, frankly, none of the centrist Democrats have. And I think as we think about impeachment, the surest way to embolden the Democratic base is to put all of the president's crimes in the middle of the news cycle. That will inflame the Democratic base. And like, yeah, it might inflame the GOP base too, but to shy away from inflaming the other side's base because you think it's going to lose an election, like, why even bother participating in the first place? That's just like giving up the game at the outset. And moreover, the last thing I'd say here is that the people who tell us that impeachment would cost us the 2020 election are the very same people who never saw Trump coming. These are the same people who were building Trump in 2016 because that they thought he was so crazy that that was going to deliver the election to Clinton. They've already proven themselves serially incompetent is a bit strong, but certainly ducking into punches. And frankly, we shouldn't be listening to those voices. We should be heeding, for instance, the oath of office, which calls on every member of Congress to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we know that the principal threat to our Constitution is in the White House. And I just would want Congress to show up and do its job. Other issues that I'd press the speaker on include her defense of pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies above the health and interests of her constituents. I'd press her on abandoning federal investment in affordable housing and particularly juxtaposing that with the crisis in urban housing all across the country, especially acutely in California, particularly here in San Francisco. I'd press the speaker on her reticence to empower the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis with subpoena power and the authority to make policy as it should have in order to deal with the mounting global climate crisis. And I'd press her on the PAYGO rules, through which the speaker essentially made the incoming Congress beholden to a Republican fiscal austerity demand. We could go into foreign policy from that, surveillance, incarceration, all kinds of things, but those would be the very first set of things that I'd press her on, and I'd be very, very eager to have that debate.
Wow. Nancy Pelosi, I've long had I've been long operating under the belief that she, maybe she came in as one person who had this, she was considered a maverick, I think, a trendsetter back in, I think it was the late 80s. But since, it's been a long time since I've really been excited or thought that she had the real gravitas really to lead. But every time I turn around, people are defending her. I got in an argument with a commentator you may know, Sam Cedar, about Nancy Pelosi. I thought that she, being a part of that losing session where we lost 1,100 seats in governorships throughout the country, I felt that she should take a hit on that. I mean, and I was told, no, Nancy's great. If you don't have Nancy, you get Steny Hoyer. And I'm like, well, Steny Hoyer sucks too. I know, I'm from Maryland, right? Not that I like Tillman. Tillman's a jerk. The guy that, anyway, there's a tape floating around where Steny Hoyer told Tillman, who was running, I think it was in California, that we had a CDAR lined up. But back to Nancy Pelosi. Tillman, if you're watching, screw you, dude. He gave me a hard time because I don't like Senator Elizabeth Warren as much as he likes Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I told him I'd mention it. The point is, Nancy Pelosi, I feel like it's time for her to go, bro. But she is if she steps down, do we get Steny Hoyer? Is that if you take her seat, you don't become the House Speaker? Then we get stuck with Steny? Is that part of it?
I think that the next Speaker of the House should be either Barbara Lee or Pramila Jayapal, and with more seats in the Progressive Caucus, we can make that happen. The balance of power in the Democratic caucus is fairly finely balanced at the moment between corporate centrists and the largest wing of the caucus, which is the Progressive Caucus. And the Progressive Caucus is firmly to Pelosi's left. That's the one that I would likely be joined. That's the one I am poised to join, should I be so fortunate as to win the general election in November 2020. And it's the caucus that is pioneering proposals, including the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, and some of the robust solutions to our various social crises. If a few more votes in the Progressive Caucus would be enough to flip the balance of power in the House, we wouldn't have to deal with the Hoyers or the Pelosis or any of the centrists. We could put in place House leadership that would reflect the needs and interests of the working American people and the future generations that for the last generation have been shut out of our nation's governance.
In case we run into any future problems, Shahid, I think this is great for giving people a primer of what your campaign's about, what policies you stand for. But so just in case we run into any problems, Shahid, where do people go to find out more about your campaign?
You can visit us online at www.shahidforchange.us. We're also on all the major social media platforms at Shahid for Change. That's SHAHID like David, FORCHANGE.
There you go, Shahid. That way, if anything happens, guys, you know where to go. Shahid, I want to talk about. I saw that you're a marriage equality, and I was thinking. I saw that you're a marriage equality activist, and you've been doing this for a long time. I was reading up on your website. You're one of the great champions of marriage equality. And
I
in
wouldn't
light
say
of
great champions of, but I was early in the movement.
there you go, early in the movement. Well, you're so humble, man. So was Bernie Sanders, by the way. Abortion rights seem like they're under siege. Would you agree with that? And I don't know where Nancy falls on this, on the abortion rights issue, but is there any difference between where you stand and where she stands?
She is, to her credit, a stalwart defender of women's right to choose and their control over their bodies, as I would be. One area in which I think I might be poised to outflank Speaker Pelosi with respect to reproductive rights is particularly with respect to reproductive justice. So that's the opportunity for working would-be mothers who might want to have children, who can't have children because of the pressures of the marketplace, to viably consider motherhood. And Medicare for All is a crucial aspect of creating that opportunity for reproductive justice. You can see empirically the birth rates in our country declining as would-be mothers and fathers, families generally, are pressured not just by the unique challenges of parenthood, but by everything from the housing crisis to the student debt crisis, the way they intersect for young couples that might be inclined to have kids is particularly pernicious. And so, we could think about Medicare for All and reproductive justice strictly, if anything else, through the lens of ensuring that the birth rate remains high enough to maintain the population, even if you didn't think of it through the justice and rights lens. And I think that's a way in which, it certainly would match Speaker Pelosi where she is at and where she has been in terms of defending women's rights. And I would go further in particularly defending the rights of working women, who the Speaker has not shown up for.
There's been a lot of conversation about the Hyde Amendment. And, a lot of people were discussing how Joe Biden moved on this, how he was in support of it, now he's not in support of it. What are your thoughts about the Hyde Amendment?
Well, first of all, we should certainly repeal it. There's no question there. I think Biden's flip-flop here is very revealing, because anytime you have a politician who's rescinding a prior position under the scrutiny of the light of day, it reveals both their willingness to pander and also the thinness of their commitment to whatever they're committing to. And we shouldn't take Biden, frankly, very seriously. I mean, given Joe Biden's record in promoting mass incarceration, for instance, in the way he treated Anita Hill in the confirmation hearings for Justice Thomas in 1991, who wouldn't be on the court if Joe Biden just did his job fairly, instead of in a vicious way really targeting a powerful woman of color and allowing her to be attacked under a national microscope. When it's just preposterous. Joe Biden has no business being in the race. I mean, the man's run for president several times and he's never broken out. As far as I know, he's never won a single state's primary. And so the possibility of putting him up against the kleptocrat is stupid, frankly, and no one should consider it.
I think it's very risky, and for some reason, I think people just long for the days of Obama, as if those days were the greatest days. I don't know. I think the normalcy. I think what it is that the corporate media spends so much time shining a light on the travesties of Donald Trump, that they're seeing these things happen for the first time. The deportations, the
whistleblowers in the press.
There you go.
Yeah.
But a lot, not all of it. Don't get me wrong. Donald Trump is corruption on steroids. He's a horrible president. I agree, but Obama did some things that he should have been called out for. Some things that should have been more publicized. And now they just feel like it's all Trump. So I get it, but I'm with you on the Hyde Amendment and with Joe Biden. Look, I prefer actually. And I know I may catch some heat for this, but I prefer that Joe Biden be for the Hyde Amendment if that's who he really is.
Of course.
It's not so much that, I still don't agree with him, but at least I know he stands for something. At least, come on, man, you're an old school politician. If that's what you think, if that's really what you believe, go with it.
Have the boldness to run on whatever convictions you expressed and voted on before. Another way to think about that is stop trying to obscure who the candidate is. And this relates to authenticity. This relates to seeing what you get. And the fact of the matter is that a career politician like that who's going to be a weather vane is a little better than a pollster. But we shouldn't be electing people who respond to polls. We should be electing people who will lead us to the future and set the policies we need, not just to respond to public opinion, but to help craft and shape it. That's exactly what Bernie Sanders has done for the last 50 years. And you see it particularly take root over the last decade as more and more Americans have, unfortunately, had to bear the brunt of an economic crisis that has only affected 90% of us, while 10% of us have apparently had an opportunity to do much better than the rest. And I think the need to show up for the people of the United States and his demonstrated track record of doing it is precisely what distinguishes the next president of the United States from all the also rans, particularly with respect to Biden and Obama. I think you're right that the only reason Biden is in the race at all is because he has massive name recognition from having been the vice president for 8 years. And I think you're right that people new to politics often fetishize the last Democratic administration, forgetting that the attacks on the press and whistleblowers in particular under the Obama administrations in some respects were worse than the Trump administration. I mean, Trump goes after the press all the time, calls them the enemy of the people, but Trump hasn't prosecuted more journalists as whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than the combined 250-year history of the Republic. He hasn't. It wasn't Trump who exiled Edward Snowden. The idea, it wasn't Trump who pioneered robotic drone strikes as a way to vaporize U.S. citizens without charge or trial. It wasn't Trump who ignored the Black Lives Matter movement and ultimately doubled down on the police industrial slavery complex by arming police with body cameras, which now are monitoring the millions of Americans in the field of view instead of the cops whose accountability we've all been clamoring for. I warned of that 5 years ago, incidentally. The Obama administration was the height of deportations in this country. People think about Trump being vicious to immigrants. Obama might have talked a big game about immigrants, but his policies and the administration that he headed was a meat grinder.
And just to cut in right there, I just want to say that part of what vexes me is that I have to contend with people like Candace Owens and people of her ilk who point out all these flaws in the Democratic Party, and they say, hey, this is the reason why you should not, listen to these guys, and I agree with that. But then they follow it up with saying we need to go Republican. And I don't think that's the solution at all. I think the solution is to bring in people like Shahid Buttar, who actually have principles and ethics and actually want to fight for the types of policies that we need. It's not to go back to the old school neoliberal ways of the Democratic Party, which I have contempt for. Just imagine if under Donald Trump there was as many hashtags as there was under Barack Obama. Man, there would be black people in the streets, going crazy. We'd have a Baltimore uprising every week. But it was now it's, I'm not saying it's better, but what I'm saying is we just didn't have the focus, and it wasn't tied to the presidency in a way that pretty much everything bad that happens is tied to Trump, which I don't totally agree with, Shahid. It seems like everything that happens, we go, well, Trump. You got Trump in there. That's what caused it. Like, he didn't cause everything.
A lot of it we have to lay at the feet of the corporate Democratic Party. Case in point here, the first example I always raise with respect to that is the end racial profiling, which has been sitting on the congressional cutting room floor for the last 2 decades. It almost passed under the Bush administration until the 9/11 attacks knocked it off the table, and it's never been seen since. And it was proposed under the Obama administration, and the Obama administration never supported it. Even when the Ferguson uprising made racial profiling the object of a sustained national discourse, the Obama administration refused to show up to support meaningful police accountability. We have a 30-point plan in my campaign to address the pervasive racial and other biases across our failed criminal injustice system. They range from passing that bill, the End Racial Profiling Act, to overruling the qualified immunity doctrine to ensure that killer cops are held responsible for their actions and denying them the jurisprudential excuse that a reasonable person in their circumstances would have done the same thing. There's a particular proposal to create a national registry of cops who kill unarmed people so that a police officer can't just be fired from one department and then hired in another in exactly the same way as the cop who killed Tamir Rice in Cleveland was. There are a whole host of ways that we could address the injustices of our criminal code at the federal level. Legalizing cannabis, for instance, and removing it from the Controlled Substances Act is an important example of a civil rights imperative that will keep people out of jail and prison. But Speaker Pelosi hasn't shown up for any of those issues yet. And if we can inspire her to do that by pressing her from the left and building a strong case that we can't defer to corporate rule any longer, I'll be very happy for her to adopt and embrace any of these positions. And frankly, to the extent she declines, I'm very eager to take her seat and represent this city in the next Congress.
I love it, man. It sounds fantastic. I love the fire in the belly, man, and the fight for. You know, one of the things that always impressed me about you, Shahid, is that I get the impression it's not so much about gaining power for you. I think that you actually feel a calling to right the wrongs and actually fight the good fight, and that's what's driving you, motivating you to seek a seat. Unlike some who I feel are kind of in this for maybe less than righteous reasons.
I appreciate that. I was a Boy Scout, and you know, all the things that we learned at the time, you know, they matter to me. And I do take the rights and the principles and the liberty that this country was founded on, however hypocritical it was with, you know, slave owning founders, but the principles that they put in the documents, I believe a great deal in them. They inspired my family to move across the world twice. They've inspired the rest of the world to follow our example as we here in this country let those principles slip through our fingers in a time of relative peace. And I am not down with that. You know, my family didn't move halfway around the world, and I didn't go to fancy schools and learn what passes for law in this country to sit on my hands while the republic crumbles around me. And I am very, called to respond to these crises. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share views and agenda with your viewers.
Fantastic, guys. I want you to go to Shahid for Change. Is that a .org or .com, Shahid?
.us.
.us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Guys, before now that the system's running pretty stable at the moment, I would be so wrong if I didn't share with you a video. It's a great campaign video that of Shahid. It says it all. I don't need to give it too much more prompting. Make sure you go to shahidforchange.us. Support his candidacy. He'll be back on the show again. I have a new system in a couple of weeks, but we had to get this out there. Shahid, any closing words before we go to that video?
Just that the future is at stake and we have to do better than we are now.
That the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, will not be kleptocracy, will not be hatred or violence.
Watch out, Washington. We the people are coming to take back Congress. And we're bringing with us some big ideas like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. We did it in New York. We did it in Minnesota. We're doing it on the national stage, and now we're bringing that voice back to San Francisco. My name's Shahid Buttar. I'm running for Congress. I'm an immigrant. I'm a Muslim. I grew up in rural Missouri. When I was 16 years old, my family lost our house as I graduated from high school. I got my undergrad degree while working full-time after 10 years of night school. Then I went to Stanford to study and teach law. I've fought for your rights for 20 years, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. as a constitutional lawyer, policy advocate, writer, educator, and grassroots organizer. And now I'm running to serve the people of San Francisco by fighting corporate corruption in Congress. We don't have the corporate cash that's kept Nancy Pelosi in office for 30 years. In fact, we just don't take corporate money. That's why we're mobilizing the community, meeting in living rooms and neighborhood centers, why we're out in the streets fighting for change, demanding universal health care, fighting for your children and grandchildren's right to a future free from climate crisis and a government for, of, and by the people instead of the 1%. A voice for school teachers, working class families, and immigrants, the 99%. This movement is just getting started. After 30 years of the same representation, San Francisco deserves a champion willing to return our city to the front lines of the progressive movement. Our city stands for inclusion and pride, peace and justice, and environmental sustainability. We can't wait another 30 years for our leaders to evolve on climate change. Delay is no better than denial. The time for action was yesterday. America is the only advanced country in the world where getting sick can leave you homeless, and higher education buries people in debt for the rest of their lives. The only voices we need in Congress are ones who will take action to fix that. You have a choice. Either let profit-driven corporations destroy our future, or instead vote to reclaim this country for the people. Vote for Shahid Buttar in the March 2020 primary, and join our campaign in the meantime. We can protect the future, and we must. I'm Shahid Buttar. I approve this message, and I invite your support.